Hello and welcome to the Jay Duke Show. So typically we have top equestrians on this show and world champions and gold medalists and all that sort of thing. But sometimes we bring you some topics which are really, really important to each and every one of you out there. And today is number one on my list of top topics. There's no question about that. Today we're going to be discussing concussions and all that goes along with that. We're going to be discussing helmets and safety. And we're going to tell you some things that you had no idea that ever existed, and you're going to be blown away by this show and my guest panel. This is a very dear show to me because I have had concussion issues in the past. In early 2000, I had a serious injury, my fifth concussion, and that one greatly affected my life and not in any sort of a positive manner whatsoever. I won't get into the details of that now. That's not what today's show is all about. But we will post a link in the comment section for an article that I did write for the Chronicle of the Horse, and that does go into detail and talk all about it. But all I can say is that concussions are something you never want to have. If you do have them, you want to treat them very seriously. It's something that can greatly affect your life, and as I said, in no way is it a good thing for you. You know, just to put it plainly, I became a person that I didn't recognize and didn't know. And it's taken me many, many years to come back to a semblance of who I used to be. So, you know, please take that seriously. And I really hope that you enjoy the show. And just to show you how sincere I am about today's show, you know, we had several helmet companies that would have come on and sponsored the show because obviously we're talking about concussions. I didn't want to play any favorites or prejudice to anything. And I wanted to just give you the bill of goods. So we've decided not to have a sponsor for today's show because I really want you to hear the honest truth of what's happening out there and of what your safety is all about. So that's the approach that we've taken to today's show. And without further ado, I want to bring on my panel, who I'm very excited about because this panel is really an expert group. First of all, we're going to start off with Dr. Donna Satman. She's a board-certified neurosurgeon. She's a top spinal surgeon in Ocala, Florida. She attended the Moffitt Cancer Center, University of South Florida, the University of Massachusetts, and Syracuse University. So she is very well educated. Suffice to say, I'm definitely not going to be the smartest person in the room today as we welcome in Dr. Satman to the show. We have Cameron Allen is joining us. He is the Director of Neuroservices at Florida Surgery Consultants. He specializes in QEEG testing and diagnosis for traumatic brain injuries, and he is a graduate from Western Carolina University. And finally, we're bringing in Norman McMillan, and he is the Director of Research and Development for SLAM Labs, which is doing all sorts of wonderful things for the safety of athletes in many, many sports, which include equestrian, and we're really grateful for his time in joining us. Welcome to the show, everybody.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So let's start off, Dr. Satman, with you, please. And let's discuss, I mean, most people now today are familiar with a concussion and what a concussion entails, so we won't get into that. But if you could, and this is potentially a 2-hour answer, but if you can put into 2 minutes, what are the short-term and long-term potential effects of concussions?
Short term, the immediate is your overall safety, depending on the severity of the head injury. A head injury can progress depending on if there is hemorrhage involved. And so what you see from the first few minutes may progress and worsen if there is further bleeding or further swelling. So it's something that needs to be watched and monitored very closely in the immediate window, because what you see in the first few seconds may not be how it's perceived or behaving minutes or even hours later. In the long term, as it sounds like you're intimately aware, there can be ramifications, especially if head injuries are ignored, brushed off, blown off for pride or sake of competition, and subsequent head injuries are sustained. They are typically additive in effect. And so this can have ramifications for years, and down the road have effect on your cognitive abilities, your balance, vision, all your senses that are important for everyday life, let alone something as challenging as equestrian sports.
Yeah, no question about it. It affects all aspects of your life. And I do want to put out to the viewers that are watching this show live, if you have any questions, please send them in. We will do our very best to get them to our panel and answer them. And I do appreciate your contributions. So Mr. Allen, what do you see? First of all, I want to talk about QEEG testing. What is that, and does that apply to what we're discussing here?
It does. It does. So QEEG testing is the quantitative electroencephalograph. And really, the QEEG allows us to take a look at a really focused how the efficiency of the brain is working. How are the different areas of the brain communicating? Whereas other functional imaging, like fMRI or MRIs, may look at more structural damage. We're looking at really how's the brain communicating. And so we can see very specifically how the white matter in the brain is communicating, which is really what head injuries oftentimes impact, and oftentimes disorders from, let's say, memory, mood regulation, any type of sensory perception, being able to keep our balance, all of that is affected by a lot of that white matter communication. So the QEEG is a really valuable tool to see how effectively our brain's communicating, how effectively is it actually working. So it's a very effective tool for this topic today.
That's great to hear. And I would imagine that this topic, when we're talking about the human brain, I mean, the science must change in such a dramatic fashion and so quickly all the time. I mean, I remember hearing, stories about how much of your brain we use and how much we don't.
Absolutely, yeah.
Your field of expertise, that there's so much that, must be coming in just every single month about what you're learning about the human brain. Can you just explain a little bit of that to the viewers, please?
Sure, absolutely. So, with every new technological development, our research can advance. And because the brain is really operating on this kind of quantum communication, it's so complicated that it's only been recently that a lot of technology has caught up in order for us to look at really how it's functioning and also how can we appropriately affect it. And I mean, just as one example from a treatment perspective, when there's a head injury and the sensory system is affected, where the balance system and then emotional regulation is affected, one tool that just recently became available in the past, 8 years is virtual reality therapy, which really floods the system with sensory information. We can pair that with things like biofeedback, neurofeedback that allow us to practice self-regulation, practice kind of the emotional regulation while re-strengthening, reconnecting new pathways in the sensory system that could have been affected by head injury. So just as an example of kind of as technology advances, our way to assess, diagnose, and to treat these head injuries has advanced so much in just the last few years.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And Norman, in your research and such, and I know you're specifically working with the helmets, but as far as, does everyone that suffers a concussion also have long-term effects, or some people just have the short-term effects, or is there any research on the numbers of that, of people that suffer concussion, of how many actually have long-term complications from that?
I mean, that would be a better question for the doctor, but honestly, clearly, if it's not, it goes without treatment. And I really do a lot in football, for instance. And, these players have gone undiagnosed for years and years and years. I mean, I'm in Jupiter, Florida here, and we have Joe Namath, and he's obviously suffered some major, brain injuries in his day. And, he went undiagnosed for years and years and years, and ended up with the shadows in his brain from the CT scans and whatever they were using for analyzing the issues. And he ended up in a hyperbaric chamber, and that was a great level of treatment for him. So it's the unknown mystery. And there's, coming from the sports side of it with the football stuff. And I've been doing that for 30 years. I used to work in the NFL for 3 years, many years ago, on head and neck and brain injury stuff at that time. And we were really in its infancy at that point. But, with a lot of athletes, they want to, probably like yourself, they want to, put it away and deal with it another day because we got to get on with it. And there's a lot of denial. And there's a lot of denial in the sports all across the board, whether it's management, therapy, whatever it is. Let's sweep it under the carpet and do it another day. And those are my big issues with it. And there's things we could be doing scientifically to prevent this stuff. Unfortunately, the helmet industry, and here I go, it's a bit of a good old boy network, okay? And, Sports Illustrated did a fantastic story on the capitalism of football helmets and the lack of science. So we like to think there's a lot of neurologists, neuroscientists involved there, but I think there's a lot of egos there and not a lot of science. And what we're trying to do is really pare this down and look at the brain, how we retain the helmets, this type of thing. And, linear hits, torsion, deflecting blows, all these things, and, these have to be done. We're working on different types of analytic systems to be able to try and do things in real time as opposed to cadavers or crash test dummies, that kind of stuff. But to answer your question, to me, let's just sweep it under the carpet and deal with it another day. And parents do it every day.
Norm, can I add something into that?
Please.
Sure.
So one of the things that in some of my conversations with Norm, who is absolutely brilliant in kind of analyzing head injury and kind of the safety equipment piece, that one of the things that really stood out to me is looking at, let's just backstory here, looking at the equestrian community, 60% of all equestrian injuries are head injuries. And, head injuries come in a lot of different forms. We can get axonal shearing from a torsion effect in the brain. Right. But only about 3.6% of the injuries in the equestrian community actually come from axonal shearing. We come more from a coup, contra coup type of perspective, where the head hits, bounces off, and hits the other way. And so when that happens, I'm so sorry about the dog in the background. What's happening is that it really just comes down to physics. That the amount of surface area and the amount of the type of cushioning that can absorb the blow from the head injury is really what is causing the majority of these long-term effects in the concussions. And so, you can wear the chest harnesses and the neck braces and kind of keep the torsion from happening. And that's fantastic. Anything extra you can do. But when it comes to mouth guards, when it comes to the mandibular pressure of the actual chin strap compressing and actually driving up into the temporal lobes and causing kind of repetitive concussive action there. So chronic concussive impact. And then you get that direct blow. And so some of the pieces that I've really been fascinated with Norman's work is really how he's able to create a structural framework to actually capture the different cranial plates, to be able to kind of diffuse the central blow, if you will. And so that's just looking at the overall kind of injury, the primary injury, because there's so much energy behind a fall off a horse or a kick from a horse, that you're going to get this massive amount of energy and a sudden impact. And so we've got to be able to kind of shift the way that impact is actually affecting one portion of the brain. And if we can make it so that it transfers that energy around the skull, then the brain is less likely to have this reverberation and cause damage. And a lot of technology is being developed, a lot of it by Norman, to be able to kind of create that diffusion.
Wow. So I'm going to share just a little story, and I know that this was about 25 years ago, but I know that every equestrian is going to be able to relate to it. So I was competing in California in a class, and I'd hit my head actually on the horse's neck. We'd had a sort of a crash through a jump. I stayed on, hit my horse. So I just stayed on, but hit my head on the neck. And I'm walking out of the ring, and I could only see straight in front of me. Everything here was black. All I could see was this little tunnel here. And so I get to the little top of the ramp, and my coach, who was a wonderful coach, but of course, again, it was a different time. And he goes, "You okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm okay. My head's ringing a little bit." And he goes, "Okay, well, hurry up. We got to get on the next horse." And I said, well, I got a headache. And he says, well, here's some aspirin. I said, well, how many do I take? He says, take 6.
Oh,
So
well,
I took 6 aspirin and was on the next horse, 5 minutes later, and away we went. And that was how we used to deal with it. So, Dr. Salmon, let me ask you this question. So what should have been the protocol when something like that happens? So a rider hits their head in the ring, which we see happen, on a regular basis at the horse shows especially, but sometimes at home too. So what's the protocol when a rider hits their head? What should happen?
Yeah, absolutely. There should be downtime. There should not be a get back on the horse. There should be a quiet, cool, dark place where you can sit down and people can check on you and ask you questions repeatedly. Just because, as I mentioned earlier, the transition or the neuronal processes and the swelling can change minute by minute. So there is a protocol for repeated testing and questioning. I mean, the same thing happens in football and hockey. They're off the field and they're back in the locker room, and they're getting retested minute by minute to see if there's a progression, a change, an improvement in the findings and their ability to respond, or if we're going downhill and then action needs to be taken. And I love that. That's well-meaning, but it's your neurosurgeon's worst nightmare is to get aspirin for a traumatic head injury. So if there is any bleeding, we're just encouraging it right along while you're racing down the next course. Well-meaning, yes, but I mean it's that kind of. And this sounds like in a competitive field. I mean, unfortunately, these kind of things happen in people's backyards as well. The breadth of the equestrian field. So to get the community word out there in the industry that you should be riding with buddies, that you should, have somebody with you. So if something happens, somebody's there to check on you or put your horse away for you. You're not laying out in the sun by yourself unattended for minutes. I mean, there are injuries that happen that probably could have improved the outcome if they weren't alone and minutes weren't progressing without somebody being attended to. So riding alone, I think, is a big one. It's like swimming alone. You got no second pair of eyes and ears if something happens.
So Cameron, I have a question for you here. Sure. So I know now we can do baseline testing. Mm-hmm. So that gives you an idea. So my question to you is, if a rider hits their head and then now you have to go and get it, cleared by a doctor in order to ride again in competition, even though that doesn't happen consistently at all, but that is the protocol. Which actually I did help bring that in myself. So I did help to bring that in, and we're on the right track a little bit.
Very nice.
But without baseline testing, can a doctor really say, yes, this person is safe to return to competition, say 24 hours later? Like, let's say they go into the doctor and seem pretty good. Everything, there's nothing traumatic or nothing serious. Sure. But can a doctor actually say, yeah, you're good to go 24 hours later, or is that just guesswork?
It's hard to say, because in a lot of cases, yes, we can take a look and we can see, okay, the vestibular system, the balance system, the sensory motor system is intact enough in order to maintain daily life. But the trouble is that for most scans, let's say that somebody's going in for a CAT scan, even if they're going in for an MRI with what's called diffuse tensor imaging to see what some of the communication is, they're not going to be able to see for about 3 weeks what the actual effect is. With a QEEG, you can see a little bit quicker. With a EEG, a traditional EEG, you can see a little bit quicker, but it still takes a little bit of time for the entire circuitry of the brain to settle into its new norm. Because when we have an impact, part of the brain kind of cuts off in order to keep from overwhelming the rest of the brain. So then symptoms tend to show up, like 3 to 4 weeks down the road. And, about 20% of individuals will have long-term effects that go well beyond a year and all of that. And so what's challenging is that, yes, we can say, okay, this rider could get up there and hang on to that horse. And most of the time, they probably will be able to kind of manage to get through. But as you know, Dr. Satman and Jay, and for all of the riders out there, when you're in the zone, when you are right there with your horse and you are just completely 100% in that flow state and being present, you are reading the animal's body language, you are reading the course, you are going through all of the motions fluidly. And if you have to stop and think about, oh, shoot, should I do this? Should I do that? Then all of a sudden you're thrown off. You're going to second guess. And so a secondary injury or to fall off the horse again or to misread a turn is much, much higher. And so I think that the research shows that you're 30% more likely for a secondary accident after a head injury. So even if you're cleared to do it, is it a good idea? Probably not.
Right. And the fact that the horse is so sensitive, they can feel the nuances that the rider is not right, that the balance is off or their lean is behind. And so this is going to have an effect in the communication between the horse and the rider. I mean, if the horse is young or not as experienced, there can be some serious ramifications of getting back on there, and your own body language is off because your whole equilibrium has been affected. And just like you're saying, a second injury on top of a first is disastrous. So the worst thing would be to push it and risk that.
So Dr. Satman, so for those of you that are watching, Dr. Satman is an equestrian. So you have a fall in the ring and you hit your head. And it's not terrible, but you have a significant blow to your head. And someone says, well, okay, you need to miss the next 3 weeks of competition. A lot of people are just going to say, hey, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to hide this. And so, that's a stigma that somehow needs to be overcome because, I know that, my daughter last year, she bumped her head just lightly. It wasn't a concussion, but bumped her head. And the steward came and checked her out, and she was like, thanks, Dad, for making this rule come into place type of thing. And, but it's really a very difficult topic because you're talking about athletes that are trained, hey, to get back on. And of course they want to compete and say, okay, it could be 3 weeks before we really know the effects here. That's devastating.
Yeah. And understandable. If this is somebody that is trying to make a profession, there are qualifying events for many of these fields, and they're fixed dates. And if you miss that qualifying event, that may be it for that season. So there's tremendous pressure, really across the board for all sports, but equine is no different in that regard. And I think because there is no one singular salaried team, the risk of pushing yourself without being a salaried member of a professional team is higher because you're relying on that income from each ride, each competition. And your maintained sponsorship from being out there and being a presence and participating, not sitting at home on your couch. There's pressure for sure.
It is very difficult. So we have some questions from our viewers, and we're going to get to those very shortly because we have some great questions coming in. I have a question here for myself, for Norman, and simply, do helmets properly protect a rider?
No.
And explain, please.
They don't. I just got back from Wellington on Saturday, and there's a big style issue, and obviously there's tradition in your sport. And the hair issue is the thing that mortified me the most, okay? And so to the question, does a helmet work? Does it protect you? Not in its present form, and maybe the helmets aren't even part of the issue, but putting your hair up in a bun and then pulling it over the top of your head, and then at that point putting a helmet on that, has completely compromised the helmet. Utterly insane. Okay, that you know, maybe that concept worked many years ago, but with what we know today, we do the very same thing in football with, you know, the hair extensions and the dreadlocks. You cannot expect that helmet to be fitting and doing what it's supposed to do if you're going down that route. Then the next side of the question, you know, to that point is how the helmet, if we just eliminate the idea of the hair up in a bun idea, I guess that would be for not the jumper,
the equitation and the hunters.
The hunters, exactly. If we eliminate that whole thing and we have the hair in a ponytail, that type of thing, is how we're retaining the helmet. And then, as Cameron had talked about, was the torsion and, you know, linear hits and things like that, and how we retain the helmet. You know, how many times do you see an athlete or an equestrian with the helmet strap hanging down 3 inches off the bottom of his chin? Okay, insanity. The occipital is a great place to anchor a helmet. What we're looking at doing is literally starting with a CAT scan and using the soft tissue to develop literally 3D images and that's what we're doing, is literally taking a physical cast of the athlete's head and then building, you know, segments of it with padding and retention and matrices to be able to truly customize the helmet to the head and gain a better understanding of fit. Okay, and then at that point we can explode that out to this one size fits all, going back to this whole idea of thinking that small, medium, and large, you know, work. I do a lot of motorcycle racing, motocross racing, and the helmets that we use are really, you know, fairly well traditionalized in certain shapes. I'll literally go in there with a cutting tool to go in and take the fiberglass, or not the fiberglass, the styrofoam out of there to be able to custom fit the helmet to my head. I mean, utterly ridiculous to think that that's what we do. And we do this, you know, routinely with helmets. So the fit of the helmet is you know, critical. Then we're going to talk about styrofoam in a helmet.
Well, just one sec before we get to
I could go off there, sorry.
Wendy Sumner just sent in a question just on this, and I want to get to that because it is very relevant to what we're saying. So this question is for you, Norman. And so assuming we cannot, you know, do tomorrow, somebody needs to go to the tack shop and buy a helmet. You know, they need a new helmet. And the 3D technologies, that's not an option for tomorrow. So Wendy's question, Carly, can we put that up? What is the proper way to fit a helmet? So what do we do tomorrow when we have to buy a helmet?
Okay, so if you're going to wear your head in a bun, hair in a bun, okay, then put your hair in a bun and make sure that fits. Okay, then you're going to talk about rotation of the helmet. All right, you've got to utilize the chin strap for what it is. Okay, and that's retention. Okay, what you want is good engagement in the occipital, this area back here, the little bone there. Some are more prevalent than the other, and then others. But anatomic is a great place to grab a hold of. Chin strap and rotation of the helmet, you know, to be able to get that as a good solid fit to your head. Because what you don't want to do is fall and have the helmet rotate, okay? That helmet, you know, is there to obviously absorb some of the shock and then on the deflection, not roll and then take your head with it, okay? I mean, it's, you know, you need to have, and we don't have a lot of torsion in these helmets right now, but in the present state of what this is we don't want to see that helmet rotating. And these helmets we are breaking them in over time because the foam will condense. But the hair on the bun, if we're going that way with the hunter thing, then get that hair up there. Make sure that helmet is, you know, properly fit towards the bun of the hair, and then getting the retention from the helmet or the chin strap. And some of the helmets I'm seeing have a ratcheting device at the back. And make sure you grab a hold of that occipital. But I never want to see these helmets do this or this or this or this. If it's a properly fit helmet, you should not see these issues.
Right.
And always wear a helmet.
Cameron,
here's the other caveat. If you've fallen in your helmet and hit that helmet, you need a new helmet. That is not meant to have repeated injuries and blows to that helmet.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
it's a one-time deal.
There was some research about that. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I have a question about that, Dr. Setman. So I love football, so I watch football all the time. And on every single play, these guys are hitting their heads together. So that would mean what you're saying is if either they're different helmets,
and the
technology is different, or after every play, the football players need to be changing their helmet, which they don't. They change them on a yearly basis.
Mm-hmm.
So is technology different?
I'm sure Norman can confirm. I'm guessing you can see by the helmets behind him, they are different helmets. There is the need for lightweight and breathability to be able to see and to be able to perform with it that long and encourage the rider to use it. So they are differently constructed. And unless our construction of equine helmets changes, for now, the standard is one significant injury where there's any kind of off in the head down first, any kind of symptom afterwards, that helmet should be replaced.
Well, and I always thought, well, I wondered if that was a marketing technique or if that was because I have heard something about the honeycomb effect and how that works. So,
well, it's due to the properties of the helmet, because the motorcycle industry is the exact same basic design, okay? And you're talking about styrofoam, and that compresses once and leave it alone. Whereas football helmets, this is where we're going with the technology, is it has to be a link to more of linear and glancing blows, and those are what the football helmet scenarios deal with. And there's true shock absorbing cells. When you do helmet testing at Virginia Tech or whatever, they tend to go left, right, forehead, crown, and occipital area. And those are the impact vectors if you're dealing with them. And those things are all based on the idea of shock absorption, okay? Whereas with a football helmet, with a equestrian helmet or a motorcycle helmet, one hit, one wonder, get the heck out of it and get another one, because it's done its deal. And that's not marketing, that's the truth, but it's moving forward. We need to change that as well. And the other thing that the doctor mentioned, though, is weight, okay? When we talk about, and I'm as guilty as this as anybody, that this helmet right back here is a very light helmet. This motocross helmet, it's 1.5 pounds, okay? It's all carbon fiber, very lightweight. But that doesn't help, okay? Mass will slow. If the heavier the mass, the less the velocity, okay? So there is this, dance that we have to look at. A football helmet can weigh as much as 6 pounds, okay? Whereas our equestrian helmets or my motorcycle helmets are 1 pound, 1.5 pounds. We are going in a very, very dangerous direction in that idea of all lightweight, all this. It's not a good idea. We need to slow velocity. Wouldn't you agree, Cameron?
Yes, absolutely.
And
it really does come down
better than I ever could.
And Cameron, what as far as with the head injuries that we see, do you feel there? What could you put a number to how much those would be reduced with proper fitting and properly made helmets?
I could speculate and I could assume, but if you really look at the physics rather than just style of a helmet, and you look at reducing that torsion, you end up you diffuse the amount of impact. So rather than having one singular point that it's diffusing over a larger area, the physics stand to reason that you're going to be reducing these head traumas by probably at least 50%. But we really have to look at what kind of shock absorbing gels we can put in these helmets. We've got to look at how we can diffuse them, how to make these helmets a little bit smarter and reactive to the motion of the rider. And so I think that as technology is advancing, I think absolutely we can minimize a lot of these injuries, because the brain is resilient. It's meant to move, it's meant to rotate. But with the rotational speeds or the impact speeds of over 14 miles an hour, that's where we really see moving into the moderate concussion kind of framework based on current research. And so if we can slow that down and have a little bit more compression and less rebound in the materials in the helmet, then you're not creating this shock force, you're creating this absorption. So
okay, that's awesome. We have a question from one of our viewers. Wendy Sumner has sent in a question. I think it's Wendy's question. Let's see. Can we just put that up? Yes, from Wendy Sumner. I had brain surgery and part of my skull, the size of a nickel, is thinner than the rest. I ride with a helmet, but can this be an issue even with a helmet? Dr. Salmon, can you answer that, please?
Thinner. I'm uncertain. I'm presuming there was, is that synthetic, that there was a cranioplasty? I mean, if that's the case, there will be changes in the dynamic of how the skull performs.
Right.
I mean, we're still, there's not really any way to get around that, because we just don't have, like they're talking about, the future versions of the helmet that may be more dynamic and may be able to respond to those nuances. But with the current helmet industry, we're still going for what Norman talked about as best fit, proper fit, and always wearing it, even when you're handling the horse, because being on the ground and just handling the horse itself, the horse can spook and turn its head and cause a head injury, can kick out and cause a head injury. So just being mindful of being around the horse, always having that helmet on, with the vulnerability.
Absolutely.
That's a great point. We have another question, and this one I'm going to throw to Norman from one of our viewers. And this is from Melinda Oikel Sutherland. Many equestrian helmets have a brim. Is that a safe measure on a helmet? Would that contribute to additional forces / torsion on a rider if the brim did not break away? So is the brim a safety?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's literally, something to slow energy quicker than other areas. And so the breakaway visors are critical. I mean, that should be mandated. We don't need, jutting sharp edges to, slow velocity, and sending energy. Again, Cameron can really speak to that again. But the idea of, we need, round helmets, and we see this in the motorcycle industry more and more, where we went to style and we had all these sharp edges and so forth. But what you need is a rounded helmet to be able to cause glancing blows as opposed to linear blows, and then let the thing roll off. And even helmets in the motorcycle industry will have breakaway parts, like literally the visors on the back or the wind deflectors on the back literally break off. So I would highly suggest that you would get a helmet that would have a breakaway visor.
So Cameron, just to follow up on that, I even heard today on the radio that the NFL is considering specialized helmets for different positions on the football field. Just as from exactly what you're talking about, the different points of impact and how they're developing this. So go ahead and follow that up for us, please.
Sure. So I think that just to kind of use a bit of a grotesque metaphor for our head and how our brain functions within our head, let's take an egg, for example, that, evolutionarily, the egg, it has developed to be a very strong shape because the forces kind of act around it. And so if for an NFL, or if we're talking about the breakaway visor, if any one of these points end up kind of pinpointing that energy, it's easy to crack an egg. It's much easier to squeeze an egg and actually burst it. And so if we can create that energetic diffusion, and so looking at, the whole idea of NFL players from different positions, they're going to have different forms of hits, different speed of hit. And so being able to modify how to diffuse that more effectively, you're going to have more specificity in the particular helmet. So for instance, linemen, or if you're dealing with somebody who's a hunter, who's going to be jumping, who's going to be kind of going head over heels a little bit more, being able to kind of look for more impact resistance or diffusion through the front. Whereas if for somebody else that's going to be kind of turning a lot, maybe we were going to want to focus in a little bit more on the temporal and occipital sites in order to diffuse. So I think absolutely the more that we can streamline this, because as Norm was saying earlier, weight is important, that we don't need extra weight kind of helps diffuse some of that torsion. But if we go too heavy with it, especially with the amount of energy that coming off a horse gives you, that you're actually creating the alternative. And so there's this balance ratio as well as padding that needs to happen in particular regions in order to not overweight the helmet, but also cause some specificity per riding technique and style. So absolutely, this needs to be customized, researched, and really made to fit, not as a one size fits all. When it comes to the brain and everything from the injury or protection to the injury, to the therapeutic modalities that we use to recover the brain, there's no such thing as one size fits all. It has
right. And with the weight of the helmet, I mean, the rider is in a unique position where their neck is actually an extension for many of the disciplines.
Yeah.
And so if there's too much weight, this is magnified on the neck. And if the rider is experiencing neck fatigue from those extra few pounds, that's going to affect compliance and willingness to engage in that degree of safety measure, so that they're avoiding neck injury and chronic neck strain from lifting that extra weight.
And there's the balance of how do we protect the head without causing more kind of spinal injury,
Right.
and because the neck becomes a fulcrum for anything that's heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But also then working on that idea, though, I mean, as an athlete at some of these levels these guys are getting to, the neck needs to be worked on. Okay. I mean, that's part of your, regimen of training. You should be working on your neck because there's a lot of whiplash, a lot of, those effects in horseback riding. So, the weight of helmet's one thing, women, in soccer, for instance, with their concussion issues, heading the ball. Okay. They're clearly saying we need to have, if your daughter's out there playing soccer, the neck has to be worked on. So if you're taking it to a higher level, you need to be really looking at,
those exercises.
Yeah. Gotta get that.
Why? Okay. So you say the foam is not the best way to keep the head safe and the brain safe.
Right.
Why is it used? Like, is it a cost thing, technology, or what? Why?
It's tradition. It makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. We do it in the motorcycle industry. We don't do it in football. We're moving out of it in hockey. I mean, football helmet to me, in its 5 positions, is a well-engineered scenario as far as direct hits. Okay, those shock absorbers, and there's literally 4 different drummers of material inside there. Although the helmet doesn't, particularly move independently to the head, it tends to move the head. And the way we anchor the football helmets is from the deep, hard chin pads against the mandible. And the mandible causes a lot. I mean, as you said, you went over you go over the horse's head and you hit your lower jaw like a boxer's hitting. That just translates into a whole new different level of brain injury. But, the idea of, shock absorption is, key to this. So we need to completely rework this idea. Helmets in 5 years from now should not look anything like they are now. And we are doing that. Okay. We are doing that. All right. They should be custom initially so we can get some data and some algorithms so that we can plug and play, literally plug and play. So the trainer, the coach, whatever that is, should be able to scan your head with your cell phone and then go to that helmet manufacturer, and then that pull up an algorithm of going, for the forehead, we need pad A, we need pad L1 for the occipital, so that these things are completely engineered for much, much more superior fit and function and shock absorption. And that's coming. That has to come. And this will then, like Cameron says, we go there, we can make a difference. But and the football industry is notorious for this. It's the standards behind that have not changed in years. It's a business. We're not talking about business. We're talking about people's brains. Yeah. In the sport of, I've had conversations with equestrians that spend more money on their boots than they do on their helmet. $3,000 for a pair of boots. I'll go, well, how much you pay for your helmet? And they'll go $600, and they're whining about it. And I'm like, well, we can fix a leg, but the brain, not a little slippery slope there. So, get our priorities straight, okay, mom and dad. Okay. I'm sorry. There we go.
That is so true. And Melinda had asked a question, and her question was quite interesting too, is when should a helmet be replaced if it's not been involved in an impact? And I think the answer, what you're saying there, is probably fairly reasonable. If the technology is changing all the time, every 2 years, every 3 years? I mean, what
every year.
Every year.
Especially if the child has to grow. Okay. So all of that, and helmet materials break down rapidly. Okay. Those are not well developed. It's like the GE fan of old. They build them forever. Well, we don't do that now. We build things to be disposable. Those are disposable. Helmets are disposable, and don't bet your life on that.
Yeah.
Wow. Dr. Setman, what would be for this topic for helmets and brain injuries and that, what advice would you have for people to try to make it safer as a sport? What would you like to see happen, whether it be from an industry standard or whether it be from a technology standard or whether it be, or how would, you're an equestrian, what would you think would help people safer?
I think I think it needs to go through all levels, because the number of people that I still see riding without helmets is significant. And so because before, headgear for many years has just been a form of fashion, a statement. I mean, it still goes on today with cowboy hats and top hats, and because it looks the part. So to get that stigma and to get people to embrace the helmet, the look of the helmet, just to get that in the community is step one. Because the best intended helmet, if people aren't using it, if there's a stigma and they don't grab it, the statistics are out there that the professionals are the ones that can go in and get their head scanned, and they got trainers to look and check and remind. But the number of head injuries are much more significant with the amateur riders who don't have a trainer or a professional watching over their shoulder. They go into the store, they pass by the helmets on the shelf, they think, what am I going to buy this for? They don't know how to fit it. I mean, to get it within the community, whether that's through social media or if the helmet industry themselves can engage and be more present, and but that's the first hurdle, is to get it through the community, that this needs to be taken seriously. I just looked up, there was a paper out in January of last year that looked at the National Traumatic Brain Injury Data Bank, and equestrian sports represent 45% of head injuries in their national data bank between 2003 and 2012, which was by far and away the most significant number of sports-related head injuries in that time frame. Wow. For 5 different categories of sports that were looked at. So if we just begin with what we have available to us today being used routinely, this would be a huge step forward.
Wow.
How many of those people were not wearing helmets?
Cameron, what would be your what would you like to see happen to make it better?
Well, I think that certainly continuing to advance the technology in helmets, and certainly increasing education and getting away from kind of there's some of this stigma right now over too much safety in sports, and like there's kind of this split camp between like just forget it, I'm just going to live my life and do this thing, versus like I need this thing to be absolutely 100% bulletproof and keep me safe no matter what, and I'm going to bubble wrap everything. And so there's a balance in looking at the science, making the evidence available. I mean, even when I was doing some research for this podcast to look at what Dr. Satman was saying of how many individuals ride, how many individuals that are riding that aren't even riding professionally or in competition, but just are out there and riding, the number of injuries that, 22% of the injuries from horse-related injuries weren't even from being on the back of a horse. It was from a horse knocking you out of your trailer or kicking or whatever else. And so there's a lot of education around that. And, I think that there's a whole lot of kind of awareness that needs to be brought about, like how are we interacting with our animals, and how are we interacting and kind of checking, like if we have had a head injury, if we have had an impact, if we are scared getting on that horse, checking ourselves and recognize that animal is going to sense our incongruence. There's going to be a mismatch of kind of communication with that animal. And so I think that there's a whole lot of education that could happen, not just from the head injury component, but how we interact with the animals as well. And then I think that the other piece of it, that head injury is inevitable. Injury in general is inevitable. So what do we look at on the other end of it? How can we recover the brain? How do we use the technology that's out there for virtual reality therapy, for things like neurofeedback and biofeedback, for some of these neuroimaging modalities that can help individuals bounce back and recover much quicker, that then is going to ultimately lower secondary injuries and get people back and get their mood regulation back, help them re-engage in relationships with families, and get back to being able to engage with meaningful work. So I think that it's kind of a three-pronged approach of it: developing the technology, intensive education, and recognizing that there are resources out there to recover from these brain injuries significantly, and not being afraid to engage in that.
Thank you so much. You guys are amazing. You're just incredible. And this show has been just so special. I've been, thinking, I talked to Norman about this, I don't know, several months ago about this. And so it's taken a long time to come together. And Dr. Satman and Cameron and Norman, you guys are just the best panel. And thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your knowledge with all of us. It's so, so important. And to hear all you have to say and your sincerity and all of that just goes into this. It's very touching. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for bringing the topic up.
Absolutely. It's very important.
Next week, we go to young superstar equestrian Bliss here. She just had an incredible circuit in Florida, and very excited to have her on the show. So we're going to find out all about her meteoric rise to fame. I want to thank Horse Network. I want to thank Carly Sparks for putting this all together. It was a great, great show. One of the best we've ever had, and I just loved it. So thank you to Carly, and thank you to Horse Network for making this happen. And as always, ride safely and respect the horse. Take care.